Here on Bay Radio, in the last Tuesday of April, we welcome back to James Stirling. How are you doing, James?
I'm very well, thanks, Howard. Good to be back.
Last week, he explained all the criteria that make you a tax resident in Spain, and also encouraged us not to fear Spanish taxes. This week, he'll update us on the key Spanish taxes in 2026. So, James, let's start with income tax. What's the difference between general and savings income, and has anything changed from last year?
Yeah, so as you quite rightly highlight, there are two different types of taxation in Spain. The first one is general income, and that includes pension income, rental income, and any employment income. Now, each of the autonomous regions have their own tax rates, but the bands typically run from 19 to 47%. In Madrid, they can go as low as 18, and in Valencia, they can go as high as 53. On the other side of things, then, there's savings income, and that will be capital gains tax, interest, and dividends. Listeners will be pleased to know these are not different across autonomous regions. The rates run from 19 to 30%, and the top band increased from 28 to 30% last year.
What about Spanish succession tax? Can you remind us how it's improved over recent years?
Yeah, I think Spanish succession tax is probably what surprises people most when they speak to us about taxation in Spain. Typically, our clients are coming from the UK. The last 2 years has obviously brought pensions into the scope of inheritance tax, and that will happen from next year. So the financial landscape in the UK has changed dramatically, and it's made it very, very difficult for clients to pass wealth tax efficiently from one generation to the next. Therefore, the conversation I'm having with lots of clients is, okay, well, if you lived in Spain, what happens in terms of succession tax? Now, we have to be a bit careful in terms of the autonomous regions. So in the Balearic Islands, in Madrid, in Andalusia, we're very fortunate that you can pass your assets incredibly tax efficiently from yourself to direct ascendants and descendants. In Andalusia, for example, there's €1 million allowance you can pass before you pay any sort of tax. And then there's also a 99% reduction in the tax that's due on anything. So if we compare this to the current scheme in the UK, then you can have clients that will move here. And once they've been outside of the UK for 10 years, if you're able to restructure these assets and move them outside of the UK and potentially either outside of Spain or into Spain, then we are in a situation where assets pass really tax efficiently from one generation to the next.
What about wealth tax? Does it affect many people these days? And what can those who are affected do to improve their position?
It's a really good question. And I would say this is the biggest fear for wealthier clients looking to move to Spain. Wealth and solidarity tax are top of their list, but I think it's one of these things that's quite misunderstood. So again, different autonomous regions will have different rulings, but it's very similar. So Andalusia and the Balearic Islands have much more forgiving solidarity and wealth tax regimes, whereas regimes like Valencia are slightly more stringent. So it's really, really key, and I think this will be interesting for listeners. If you're thinking of moving to Spain or becoming tax resident, and you don't know which region you're thinking of moving to, then speaking to Blevins Franks about which region actually is more tax efficient for you might help your decision making. Now, as I say quite often in my job, we can give you all the information in terms of taxes, but at the end of the day, you've got to live where you actually want to live. But it just helps clients have some clarity and gives them more information to make an informed decision. One final thing to say on wealth tax is that typically clients will see the headline figures. You add up your assets and then it's taxed at 1.7% up until around 5 million. And then it's taxed at 3.4% above 10 million, in very simplistic terms. What they don't understand is the next part of the calculation, and that involves looking at whatever your income is in that given year. Now, in terms of how that affects the calculation, well, it can't be less than 20%, and it can't be more than 60% of your taxable income base. So what that means is there's two potential planning avenues. The first one is to reduce your assets in some way, or give them to a spouse and reduce it in that way, or your children. But the latter part can then look at, okay, what is your income in any given year? So while people may look on the face of it and say, crikey, that's a large tax bill, actually when we come back to it and we look at the calculations and we do some planning, living in Spain, and we've got lots of clients that are wealthy and live in Spain with very low or no solidarity and wealth tax bills.
Do you have any insights into the controversial Beckham law?
This is something I'm very interested in, Howard. And I think the Beckham regime is, how could I put this? Misunderstood by many and understood by few. And why I'm saying that is, you can go online, you can type in the Beckham regime, and you can read some horror stories about people that have come to Spain, applied for the Beckham regime, and then halfway through it, the hacienda have questioned it. It's then been taken away from them. And at that point, then there's some tax bill that they have to pay, and with late fees, etc. In my experience, and having read these articles, this is people that have come to Spain, not understood the regime, applied for it themselves, and then been really, really surprised when the haciendas asked them to prove what they've said, and they're unable to do it. At Blevins Franks, we take a pretty strong view. If you're a brand new client coming to us and you're interested in the Beckham regime, which can be extremely powerful as we come on to, then we'll work in tandem with one of the top Spanish law firms to ensure that you've met all this criteria, so that if and when, typically, the hacienda ever question, why do you have the Beckham regime, you have a file that you can present to them, and then that will hold water. Why would you want the Beckham regime? Well, it's incredibly powerful. At a very simplistic high level, you can come to Spain, you can work an employed role for a Spanish company. There are many other different parts of the regime you can apply through, but that's a more typical one. What does that mean? Well, it means you pay 24% flat rate of income tax up to 600,000 euros and 47% thereafter. But also, one of the really important points is that any capital gains that you make outside of Spain, or any dividends you take from a company outside of Spain, are not going to be taxed. So for clients who are wealthier and they're looking to do some structured tax planning and they're still working, then potentially the Beckham regime can be really, really powerful. But I would urge listeners to look at it in detail, go in with your eyes open, and please, please seek advice. Because if you try and do this regime on your own and you think it's great with all the tax deductions that you can do, you might run into trouble later on.
Very wise. Finally, James, how often should we review our tax planning?
When it comes to tax planning, I think it's really important that clients look to do it as regularly as possible. Now, that may seem like a very open-ended answer, but I think different inflection points in people's life, whether that's a marriage or a divorce or you've received an inheritance, all these different parts of life, it's really important to seek advice, to understand what's happened, to make sure you've met all your obligations. And this is something that's really key here at Blevins Franks. We're not just a firm where we'll give you some investment advice and see you later, off you go. The wealth service we provide is ongoing, regular reviews, keeping you up to touch with changes in regulation, changes in legislation. Of course, we'll be making changes to the portfolio, which, given everything going on in the world at the minute, is very important. But also, it means tax planning. And I think if people haven't done it and are looking to do it, a really good place to start would be our website. So, blevinsfranks.com. There you can find a range of guides which will give you a basic idea of the different topics that we discuss with clients.
Thank you very much, James. We'll talk sometime in the future.
Thanks, Howard.